Hey guys, welcome to another Let's Play. We're playing with the nation Hinnom, which is a nation that I've already played. This is the first time I've ever played a nation again that I've already played before on the channel and uploaded it. A lot of the nations I've played multiple times, but never have I played them and uploaded it and done it again. But I really want to do it with Hinnom. I think I can play them way different than I did before, and therefore it is not going to be the same thing. I played Hinnom a really long time ago. So, not only will it be fun to play them again, but I'm going to be playing them again, I think, with a lot more game experience. So, and I have a very particular crafty strategy in mind. So, without too much further ado, I think we'll get into it. This episode is going to be the national overview. So we're going to be talking about all the different units that you can build and summon, and generally kind of how to think about this race. So, let's start with the units, then we will do the mages. And before that even, we'll talk about the nation in general. There are a few things about this nation. One is they are ruled by very large Rephaim, or Raphites, and those are your top tier mages, and then that is your sacred troop. Kind of as like a middle class, you have the Avites, who are basically very large humans. And then they're kind of served by a much lower class of Horites with a few Ikidu. So it's kind of... the nation itself, Hinnom, is actually an interesting kind of bit of Dominion's lore too. The Hinnom, the people of Hinnom, were feared by the basically the Israelite tribes. And I could have this wrong, but I'm pretty sure. There was a group of people feared by the Israeli tribes. Their main city, in fact, was called Hinnom. And I believe it was crushed. I'm not sure if it was crushed by the Israelites. I think it was, but I think it's somewhat of a mystery how they were crushed. It was a very strong nation. And there was some lore about basically the leaders of Hinnom being giants in kind of Christian mythology. And... yeah, so there was also some lore that they might live after death or something, and I think that gives rise to some of the later kind of Gath nations where they have undead kings and things like that. So it's very cool. It's actually a very mystery shrouded nation in current, like in real history. There's not too much that's known about it, but it definitely existed and kind of cool. Anyway. So, if we go on, okay, a few more things. The nation itself, it has great magic diversity, arguably some of the best magic diversity in the game. What it lacks, though, critically is cross paths, but it can site search almost every magic path very high, except water. So you do have a small little weakness where you don't have water, but you have everything else. A lot of your giant troops, they eat population and cause unrest. So that's another kind of weird thing about this that is going to differentiate it from the other Gath factions. Additionally, you are a blood nation, so you can blood hunt, and you can do blood sacrifices, which is a way of very quickly spreading your dominion. So, yeah, I think that's about it for these guys. Priests, they're not super great priests. They basically have Holy 1 priests. I don't think they have a Holy 2. Yeah. So kind of poor priests. And not too much in the way of sacred units. So let's go talk about all the troops now. Let's start this way and work our way back. So their top tier troop, their sacred giant, is the Raphite warrior. It costs as much as Anakites from the Middle Age. But unlike Anakites, they cause unrest and they eat population. And 20 population may not seem like much, but when you have 10 of these in a province, they're going to be eating 100 population, and if they're being led by a Melkort who eats 80 population, it's 200 population a turn. So that's kind of a lot. It means 5 turns of sitting in a province, you'll lower it by 1,000, and 1,000 is a very noticeable amount. This is not just a flavor mechanic. Like if it were like, oh, they eat 10 population, this eats 5 population, it's kind of flavor. This is a significant amount of population, so much that if you recruit them and they sit in your own lands, you will eat your population to 0 by the middle of the game in quite a few provinces. So this is a very real mechanic, or a very significant mechanic. But if we look at these guys, they're pretty awesome. They have a Dawn Blade, which is a magic weapon. They have very good base stats, 13, 15 defense, tons of HP, very, very high strength, pretty good protection, especially for the early age. They're just really good troops. They also have built-in fire resistance, and of course they're sacred, and they have Wasteland Survival. So all in all, super solid. Their gear is not magical, which can be important for some of the counters to these types of units. So you can definitely build a strategy around blessing these guys. The thing, though, is that if you build these guys, if this is part of your strategy, if you go for a bless strategy and you start cranking these guys out, you do not want them in your lands. You want them attacking enemy lands. So if you make that decision, it basically forces you into an extremely aggressive style of play. And another thing is, ultimately, large giant units end up kind of getting countered by the late mid-game. So you're a little bit on the clock. You have to switch into other strategies by the time that rolls around. And that's totally something you can do. You have a bunch of other great mage support. There's a bunch of stuff you can do to keep these guys from falling off. But just a heads up, this kind of a strategy focused on these guys, very strong in the early game, but as they potentially eat your population and as eventual counters come out, you will kind of run into some difficulties. But you could definitely come up with a super cancerous bless. And in fact, in this game, the player playing Abyssea probably has a very good bless for these guys. But he's, of course, using it for Abyssea. Okay. So that is the Raphite Warriors. I don't think there's anything I'm missing. They have 2 attacks, so they're very killy, which is one of the main downsides of Giants. A lot of times Giants lack attack density, but these guys have it. So yeah, very solid. Avite Charioteer. These guys are pretty cool. They're a slightly smaller version of an elephant that has good armor and decent morale. They also have decent defense. They're a little bit like cavalry in that manner. And yeah, they're basically just pretty strong. They're kind of hard to kill very quickly. They have a decent amount of hit points. They don't have a second form or anything. It's not like the rider falls off and they continue trampling. No. If this guy dies, they're done. As with all tramplers, you usually want them in kind of critical mass, because as a trampler charges into a formation, they tend to get themselves surrounded, so it's much better if they charge in and tend to get surrounded by a bunch of their friends, rather than only by enemies. Like a single charioteer will almost always get picked off before it can do much damage. These are pretty good for expansion. They are very expensive, though. They've got a very high gold to resource cost compared to most other things you get, so they're pretty good. For expansion, and depending on who you're fighting, they can be pretty solid in the middle and early game. Trample damage is armor piercing, so if you're fighting heavy infantry that pack a ton into a single square, these guys can squash them rather quickly. But they're pretty expensive. For these, you could have 3 different Avite troops, so anyway, that's something to weigh. Next, we have the Dawn Guard. This is Recruit Anywhere, and at this point, I'll go ahead and say all the Avites are cheaper than they were in Dominions 4. So if you watched my previous series, I went for kind of more of a Bless and Rush type build that I'm going to in this one. We'll do Pretender Design in another episode, but this is a pretty solid unit. This used to be 45, now it's 40. The cost reduction on this unit isn't as significant as it was on the other Avites. But nevertheless, this was a good unit at 45, it's still a good unit at 40. Potentially, you could say, some of the other more killy units are cheap, and they could potentially, if 2v1 against this guy, will chop them up. There's a few things you're going to use these guys for. One is Bodyguards. Bodyguards with magic weapons can be pretty useful, especially in the late game as things like Disease Demons come out. Having these guys guard your mages is pretty damn solid. They're Recruit Anywhere, so you can kind of get a ton of these out. It opens up tons of different strategies for your nation. Also, if you're fighting Kalem or somebody that's likely to rush Fog Warriors, having these guys in mass is going to definitely help deal with some of the some of the magic immune kind of spell shenanigans that can happen. Having access to Recruit Everywhere magic weapons is a huge deal. And so these guys are awesome to have in your pocket for that. They're kind of expensive. I think if you're not fighting things that require magic weapons, it's often better to go for their cousin, who is the Avite Swordsman. You can see the other guys let's compare the stats of this guy. So this guy's 25 gold, so significantly cheaper than 40. His stats are 14 protection, 14 defense, 11 attack, right? And their attack here, you can see, is 12 because of the broadsword and 21. But if we come over to this guy, it's 14, so 2 higher, and then 24, so a bit more damage. Protection is the same. Defense is higher, though. It's 16. And then I think they have a bit more hit points, too. Now, all those may seem kind of small, but they add together. So, depending on who you're fighting, this can be better bang for your buck. It really matters who you're fighting. If you really need that extra attack, like if you're fighting Vans or something like that, that extra attack can be a big deal. And if you're fighting things that don't have a great attack score themselves, going from 14 to 16 defense can be a big deal, because it's going to change how often your shield gets hit. The other nice thing about all of your avites is because they are all I kind of like size 3 units. Size 3 units help you avoid a lot of the things that kill humans. Like, a lot of humans are vulnerable to all sorts of things, or they just die. Being size 3, you're still going to have very high attack density because you can fit 2 per square. But you dodge a lot of the things which just kill humans. And you're going to get, things like regen, once you get mass regen later in the game, it's going to be way better on avites than on humans. Because you're going to have enough of an HP pool that you're not going to get killed in 1 or 2 hits, which is going to allow the regen to last over longer turns, and you also have a higher, regen amount. Now, obviously, these guys aren't sacred, so you can't get in blessed, but later, once you have the research, if you have the research, it is something you can do. So, anyway, that's the Dawn Guard. They also have Wasteland Survival, which is cool. Going on, I think all the avites have Wasteland Survival. Yeah, a lot of our guys have Wasteland Survival. What's actually kind of comical, and this is a little bit of kind of like history rewritten, is a lot of the area in the Middle East, which is where this nation hails from. It's one of kind of the biblical nations. Which I think is actually kind of weird. I think people call these, in slang, and somewhat offensively at times, they call these nations the Jews. But these are not Jewish. In fact, these were possibly killed by the early Israelites. So they are definitely not Jews. They are kind of a nation that fought against them, or were kind of unfriendly neighbors. Though by no means were they necessarily evil. I don't really know, not too much is really known about the inner practices of Hinnom and how the nation was run. It was thought, I think, to be handed down from rulers kin to kin, or from brother to brother, and I can't remember how all that went, but pretty interesting stuff. Anyway, what were you talking about? Oh, the Wasteland Survival. What's funny about that is a lot of that region actually used to be beautiful. Like if the beautiful ruin in the desert, which is oh gosh, 1 second, I have to pause it and find out. Yeah, the ruin is Petra. And anyway, there's a fair amount of evidence that the Middle East actually used to be very lush, and through part of desertification, which to some extent humans may have controlled or caused by cutting down trees and things like that and overgrazing land, they may have actually caused the destruction of that whole environment. So it's very possible that when the people of Hinnom lived there, in fact, it wasn't a wasteland. It may have been actually a reasonably vegetated place. But nevertheless, it's a wasteland now, and the troops of Hinnom have Wasteland Survival. So, anyway, we are going to now talk about the next unit, which is the Avite Hornblower. So these guys are interesting. They cost a fair amount. They're 35 instead of 25, so they're more expensive. They give morale bonus to their squad. They don't have great armor. They have kind of crappy armor. But they also have a siege bonus, and it's kind of cool, like the horns blowing down the walls is, I think, the idea, like the story of Jericho, which is another interesting story in and of itself. I'll just mention this real quick. You can go look it up afterwards. But I think an Israeli research team did a study where they told the story of Jericho, and to a bunch of children from Israel, and they said, was the tribe of Israel right to destroy this city and to kill all the men, women, and children? And inevitably, the good little children would say yes, because God ordered it. And then they got the same type of kids, but a different sample group, and they told the same story, but they replaced all the names with Chinese names. And yeah, all the kids ended up saying that it was wrong for the Chinese faction to go and break down the walls of Jericho and kill everybody. Because, of course, they murdered all the inhabitants inside there. So anyway, that's kind of dark part of biblical mythology that I think is pretty cool, and it certainly relates to this unit because the idea is they're using these horns to blow down the walls. And they have 5 siege bonus, so and they're pretty high strength to start with. So if we look at their total siege strength, it's 7.3. So if we compare that to, let's say one of these guys, it's 2.3. So they're worth 3 times the siege value of an Abite Swordsman, but they're kind of shitty in combat. So what makes sense is just to kind of mix them in with your troops, get a few of them for all of your swords. You'll have slightly better morale that'll help with things like repel and of course routing. So it makes sense to mix some of these in, and as a byproduct they will also help with your siege defense. So a kind of cool unit. They do tend to die pretty quickly. Yeah, the nice thing is their combat speed is 10, whereas I believe combat speed for a lot of your other guys is a little faster. So if you put them in a squad, they do tend to kind of lag behind, which turns out to be in the interest of everybody. So that's actually a kind of nice little feature. Next, we have the Avite Heavy Archers. These guys are pretty sick. They have a big great bow, which does a buttload of damage. 16 is a ton of damage for a bow. 12 ammunition is a lot. You're also a nation which has great access to buffs. And these guys have some of the best protection of all of your units. They have 17 base protection, which is very high for the early age. They don't have great combat stats, like attack and defense kind of suck, but they have great protection. So, yeah, if you have ways to buff these guys while they sit there and shoot their arrows, and then they run into combat after their arrows are out, they are a pretty damn solid second line. Yeah, and hitting for 20 with a short sword is not bad. But again, the main weakness is their attack and defense sucks, so they're going to tend to get hit a lot. So if you're going to buff them, you have to buff them pretty good. But if you buff them pretty good, they're really solid units. And this is also a nation which has access to fire arrows and to wind guide. So potentially you could look at a strategy to massing these. And that's just one more thing for your enemy to potentially have to counter. Okay, next we have the Avite Swordsmen. We already talked about their big brother, the Dawn Guard. The Swordsmen are pretty sweet. They've got very similar stats to the Dawn Guard, a little bit less defense, a little bit less attack. But you put 2 of these per square, they're going to be pretty hard to kill. They will chew through human infantry. I mean, this is going to one-hit most of your standard heavy human infantry, even kind of like player elite units. This is going to do a lot of work. It's high enough damage to kill giants if you get enough hits off. These are going to match up very well and very cost efficiently versus a lot of units. The only kind of problem with these guys is because they're not sacred, you have a lot of them. You're eventually going to kind of run into some upkeep issues, but hey, they're okay. I think this is probably one of the mainstay units. Importantly, they have 14 defense because as we go and look at their cousin here, the spear-wielding brother, the Avite Spearmen. These guys have a Javelin, which is kind of nice, so but this can also kind of disrupt their formation, so it really depends on how much you want that Javelin, whether you're going to use these guys or not. They do a bit less damage, 18 versus 21, but if you're fighting really high armor units, you could argue that the spear is going to be a little bit better. And then potentially, if you're fighting really low defense units, like some heavy infantry, that are not going berserk or anything like that, you could argue the repel is going to make up for the slightly lower defense, and these guys might be just as killy. So these are definitely something you can use. I think it mostly comes down to whether you want the Javelin or not, and how heavily armored the units you're fighting are. I think in general what I have found is these guys are slightly better. I'd rather have a little bit more defense than rely on repel, which often doesn't work. But I think it's a totally a game. I mean, you could test it, and it may be this guy comes out a little bit ahead in a fair number of situations. And the Javelin is nice. It can be very nice. The problem with the Javelin is it tends to disrupt your formation, and this is kind of often you want a really nice front line for your formation. But next we have the Light Infantry. These guys are 14 resources compared to the 23 resources here and the 25 resources here, and that is their main feature. In addition, they have a Javelin. Javelins are often pretty good for expansion. So when you're going to be resource constrained in the early game, cranking these guys out is often a good thing to do. with 18 damage, and then reasonable protection and defense, and a fair amount of base HP. These guys actually are going to be very solid for expanding. So these are definitely very good expansion candidates. And yeah, having kind of just basically okay armor and a shield and decent defense, they're going to do fine. You'll lose some, but these guys are going to do surprisingly well against indies. Next up, we have kind of the slave class. We have the Horite Champion. The Horite Champion, 27 HP, so it's a ton of HP, more than your other guys. 7 protection, which sucks. It's all body protection mostly, except they have a little bit of tiny head protection from natural protection. They have crappy magic resistance. If we look at the magic resistance of your other troops, it's okay, it's a very respectable 12, which is not great, but it's okay. If we look at your Dawn Guard, also 12. If we look at these guys, I think it's better, 15. Yeah. Our Horite's very bad magic resistance, right? So if there's effects where we're worried about magic resistance, like Vine Shields, or, Communions, where they're going to be spamming out all sorts of bad things like Stellar Cascades or Soul Slay, these guys will tend to fall. So they have a major resistance. This weakness, this doesn't really come out in the early game. It's more like a mid-late game thing. But they have other things which make them very good in the mid or late game too. Like they have built-in fire resistance, built-in cold resistance. That actually means they are going to be pretty solid versus a lot of nations. Nations that are relying on a fatigue strategy with Heat from Hell or Grip of Winter, they're going to do pretty well against. They also have Mountain Survival in addition to Wasteland Survival, so they're pretty mobile with map move 16. That's the other thing we should mention. A lot of these troops are reasonably... Okay, no, they're not reasonably mobile. These guys are reasonably mobile at map move 16. I think these guys are a little slower yet, map move 12. Your Giants are pretty fast, map move 16, and then 16 is often enough to move 2 provinces, by the way. These guys are 12, and these guys are 18, so these guys are pretty mobile as well. But yeah, these guys are mobile, so you can move these guys a pretty good long distance. Trying to think what else. Most importantly, they have a Great Club, which does 29 damage. This is a huge amount of damage, and a lot of players will rely mostly on protection to keep their guys from dying, and this is enough to pretty cleanly go through protection. So if you're fighting somebody that's really relying on protection, whether it's thugs or something else, thugs, often the magic resistance can be a problem. But if they're relying on protection, these guys are going to womp through it, and especially in the late mid-game, once you have a lot of the protection buffs, protection is their other main weakness, so if you can fix that, they're going to be in good shape. And they also have Dark Vision 50, so if you're fighting a nation that doesn't have access to units with Dark Vision, potentially, and you're relying on these guys with a large amount of buffing, that's going to make their defense and attack actually pretty respectable compared to the other guys who are suffering the full effects of darkness. So, anyway, or if you're fighting somebody that's going to be using darkness, most of your troops do not have dark vision, so they're going to suffer. Even your big giant dudes don't have dark vision. So this is a great thing to have in the bag for dealing with that. I think in my first playthrough, I didn't really ever use these guys, because I think as a newer player, and I wasn't really that new then, maybe I was just dumb, but you kind of get one-dimensional, and you're like, okay, then I was like, okay, you always want to use these guys because they're better than the Horites, and it's not always the case. Sometimes you need this extra damage, and sometimes later in the game, when this protection isn't a big deal, you may care a lot more about the fire and cold resistance or the dark vision. So these guys are definitely a decent chassis. Their morale's okay. The big thing is magic resistance, which by the time, in the middle game, you can definitely deal with that. Okay. Next, we have the Horite Hunter. The Horite Hunter, basically same deal. Fire and cold resistance, the survivals, and then dark vision. They have a Stone Spear, which is significantly less damage than the Great Club. The Great Club was 28, this is 19. It's piercing damage, so it's kind of okay against heavy armor. But, yeah, not great, not great. The Stone Spear is kind of a kick in the balls, but they do have a net, and that's the real reason you get these guys. This net is pretty solid. You throw it on top of units, it's going to make their attack and defense go basically to the floor, so they're really easy to hit, and they can't fight back for a turn or two until they fight their way out of the net. What this means is if you're fighting any of the elves that are relying on high defense or something like that, mixing in a few Horite hunters, they will make pretty quick work of thugs or units which are relying on high defense. Also, if you're going to be outnumbering somebody, just having a mix of Horite hunters and Horite champions or any of your other units, they will just kind of cover them in nets and beat the crap out of them. So, solid units. Next, finally, we have the Horite. These guys are like the Horite champion. The Horite champion, if we just look at the differences, they've got a little bit of protection, and they've got some... Okay, so let's see, 11 and 29, which are the main important things. The Horite themselves, they don't have the armor, so they're going to die a bit faster. And they have significantly less attack on their Great Club. And going from 11 to 9 is actually kind of a big deal. So it depends. I mean, you're going to have a fair amount more. If you're mixing them in with the hunters, and they're mostly going to be hitting people that are trapped in nets, you may be better going for these guys and just having more of them. But in a lot of circumstances, I think you're going to want these guys with their furs. It's going to... You know, they have a lot of HP, so a little bit of protection is going to go a long way. But anyway, that's the Horite Hunter. They also have slightly worse morale, and yeah, that matters. Going from 14 to 13 is going to matter. Their defense is 10 versus these guys, which is 9, so they're slightly better defense. You could make an argument for these guys. I think I prefer the champions. And finally, we have the Enkidu Slave, which you look at them and you're like, oh man, what a crappy unit. They have 6 morale, which is abysmal. It's horrible. And you don't have any units with Taskmaster, but you do have these guys with 160 leadership. So they are going to give a big old leadership bonus. So that will get these guys up, I think, to morale 9. And then if you forge like the nature item, which is going to buff morale, you can get it up to like 10. And 10 morale is okay. You know, you can stick around in a fight. The next major problem they have is their fists suck. They can't really do any damage, and they don't have good armor, and they don't have good stats. The only stat they have which is good is strength and hit points. So if you say, okay, well, we definitely shouldn't recruit them then. Well, not quite. Hold on a minute. Because they're a slave, so they get half upkeep. And they consume less food. And they're very cheap. They're only 11 gold, so they're basically the cost of a human. You get a 22 HP dude, which is a ton. What that means is you can put them at the back, and they can keep your army HP pool high. And they are quite good at sieging. They are twice as good as a human at sieging, but they have half the upkeep. So they're 4 times as upkeep, siege strength to upkeep ratio efficient as a human. So these guys are actually they're probably your best, like if we look at the upkeep, for a year, and that's going to give you 2 siege strength. And then we look at your other unit, which is probably your best, they're going to give you 7, but their upkeep is going to be 28. Right, so they're giving you like less than 4 times the amount of siege strength, but they're costing you far more than 4 times the amount of upkeep. Like 4 times the upkeep would be 16. So in terms of siege chaff, this is your best siege chaff. If you have them on a unit with a very high morale bonus, one second, I've got to disable Discord. If you have them on a leader with like a Melkort with a ton of leadership, they can sit solidly in your back line and hopefully not die. The problem is if they get in combat, they're just going to get roasted. Absolutely roasted. So you don't really want that. But they definitely can serve a purpose. And cracking forts is actually an important thing for every nation. But for, like, Avites are not very cost efficient at cracking forts. Like, human troops are not very good at cracking forts. Like the upkeep to siege ratio is kind of bad. Here you can see we cost like 2.5 times what a human costs, but we have even less than 2.5 times siege strength. So relying on these guys to crack forts, any of your Avite troops, not super great. The Horites will do a little bit better, costing 25. They're going to have more siege strength, 3.2. So these guys are actually a little better than human troops at cracking forts. But these guys are phenomenal. Compared to a lot of things for the bang for your buck for cracking forts. You can also spam them out in a hurry. So you want to go crack a fort real quickly on your border, you can make we'll have to see, probably like 50 or 60 of these in one turn if you wanted to, if you have the money. So anyway, these guys are definitely situationally useful. And this would have been something I wouldn't have thought of to use. I don't even know if it existed in Dominions 4, but I definitely didn't make any of them. So anyway, this is kind of I think that's kind of cool, that these guys can be useful. They're not undisciplined either, so you can have them guard commander. They make decent, mage guardians and things like that, just because they're going to potentially soak up hits. They're size 3, so they'll fit in the same square. They'll eat arrows. They can hit quite a few arrows before they die or things like that. Okay, so that's all of our normal troops. Then we're going to go through mages, then we're going to go through summons. So we're going to do these pretty quick. Horite Shaman. This guy is primarily he's a sight searcher and a forger. He has a research malice of 6, which is huge. So his research sucks. And if you take drain scales as Hinnom, which is definitely something you can consider, yeah, he's going to really, really suck at research, like a lot. And anyway, that's something to consider. But he's very good. He's your only death access. In Death 1, you can do your death sight searching spell, Dark Knowledge. But you're going to send a few of these guys out early. They're going to sight search and kind of prime the pump for a lot of your stronger sight searching later. They also have some important cross paths. Earth Nature is a nice cross path that allows you to potentially do Strength of Gaia and stuff later. And things like Gaia's Blessing. Death, Earth is a good cross path for Shade Mail. You can potentially do a little skelly spam with these guys by throwing a Skull Staff on them. You'll have trouble getting up to Death 2 if you don't have it on your Pretender, unless you want to climb up really far in Blood to break into Death higher. But they prepare you to have a good death and come later. And they prepare you by doing all the death sight searching. So you'll have a death income, but you won't necessarily have high death access with these guys. You can also, these guys can be budget fluffers or kind of buffing up different units in combat. If you have them around but you don't have other units. But you're going to often need to put gems on them. Because Earth 1, Death 1, and Nature 1 isn't much. You can't do too much with these as a combat mage without access to gems. One thing I'll just say is all Nature 1 mages have a niche use as Swarmcasters, so that is potentially a way to use these guys in a pinch. But usually you're not going to want a ton of them. You're just going to, because you don't want them sitting around researching or anything. They're going to be forging when they're in the lab mostly, and you'll have a few of them maybe sitting around researching because there's nothing else for them to do. After all the site searching is done. So anyway, that's this unit. I don't think there's too much else to say about it. No. Okay. Next we have the Avite Scout. Normal Scout. It's got all the survivals, stealthy, decent stat line, decent HP. Potentially could be a Blackheart candidate. Because he's stealthy, with a decent stat line, and he's cheap, and you're a Blood Nation. So yeah, potentially a candidate. He also has a Javelin, which can be pretty good in assassinations. So, like, Blackheart, Thing of Acorns, and Javelin, you'll kill a lot of stuff. And then he runs in, he's no slouch in melee either. Okay, next we have the Avite Commander. Decent commander, 85 gold, 80 leadership, decent stat line, unlikely to die from random stuff. Cannot complain, solid commander. Next we have 2 Holy 1. All our priests are Holy 1. You don't have any Holy 2 priests, which you can get right off the bat. So these guys have 0 leadership. They're 65 gold. That's mostly what there is to say about them. You have a slightly more expensive 70 gold variety that has 10 leadership. Often I think it's worth taking these guys. But if you don't have them moving around troops, it's not worth it. But, having somebody that can even just do logistics functions, like move around a troop or two when you need them to, can be a big deal. I think it's usually worth taking them. Notably, both of these varieties are more expensive than Indie Priests, so depending on what you're doing, and Indie Priests do have leadership, so sometimes you just want an Indie Priest. But they have way more HP, and if you have a really good Bless, these guys can make ultra-budget thugs. I mean, they're going to die to a lot of stuff, but if you have a really good Bless, you can throw, like, some very, very basic gear on them, and if the enemy only has, 10 PD, or, like 6 PD, they can potentially kill it. Not a great strategy, but Indie Priest can't do that, but these guys have enough HP, they could potentially do it. Yeah. I mean, very, very weak PD rating, but they'll do things Indie Priest couldn't. Okay, next we have the Akka. The Akka are pretty sweet. Very few races have access to healers. Healers is like a very special trait. Like, they're things that people wish for, potentially. This isn't Disease Healer, it's a full-on healer. It will get rid of afflictions on any unit. I mean, this is a big deal. Not many nations have it. We also get Nature 2, which is a great path to have access to. Nature 2 opens up mass protection. You can do mass protection for 2 nature gems with Nature 2. You get a supply bonus, which is nice on a race of giants. I mean, this is just a really good unit. It's more expensive per research than a lot of your other mages, but just having access to this is a really big deal. But yeah, the healer's awesome. Super solid unit. Having it in your armies, you'll gradually get rid of a lot of afflictions, and with really high value units that can build up a lot of experience stars, it's really nice to have access to that. Okay, next we have the Ami. Okay, let's talk about the Ami. The Ami is a fortune teller, 15. So you're going to get fewer events. Now, you can use this to take misfortune. And these are going to be your main research mage, too. So having research mages all the place which are stopping bad events, can be good. But also, if you take luck, you're going to get your total number, especially if you take luck turmoil, you're going to be getting more events in total. And some of those events are going to be bad. So having a fortune teller to stop bad events from happening can still be pretty damn good in luck scales. Especially if you have these in your farmland provinces where you really don't want unrest or minus population events. So these are pretty solid, especially like in your capital. Now, importantly, these come in 4 different varieties. You get the fire, the air, the earth, and the astral. And these are all really useful when you have 2 in these paths. Like, Astral 2 is a really useful mage. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it. One is you can drop Power of the Spheres without fatiguing out, and now you have your Astral 3. You can do all sorts of cool stuff. Like, I think you can even do Will of Fates. Let's check. That may be 5, I can't remember. No, it's Astral 4, right? So you have a big HP pool. It's going to cost a ton of fatigue, but you're an Advite, so you have 23 HP. I'm pretty sure, I haven't done it, but I'm pretty sure these guys can drop Will of Fates. So Will of Fates on a Recruit Everywhere mage that you're going to have a ton of, that's kind of huge. You don't even need any gear. You just need a few Astral Gems. So you want to talk, somebody's going to rush you, you don't think you have anything you can do, you can just drop a big amount of PD and have this guy pop out, do Will of Fates. You can have other guys pop out and do other stuff. Okay. So anyway, Astral 2, super good. Can do communions, other things. Can potentially mind hunt with gear. Can empower in blood, so you can do Centaur. There's a ton of stuff you can do with these guys, basically. The Earth variety, they can do all your buffing. They can do Legions of Steel on your army. They can do... they're great fluffers for some of your non-Earth Melkorts. So they can do Iron Warriors and stuff like that. They can do... Yeah, they're just really good. They can do Blade Wind when they do Summon Earth Power, and yeah. So anyway, super solid. I think, Mauls from the Earth they might be able to do too? Let's check. I forget exactly what school Mauls from the Earth is. I think it's Alteration. Yeah, they can do Mauls from the Earth. So, okay. Which is a super solid spell. But yeah, this is your... 120 gold mage that can do Mauls from the Earth. Air, these guys can do Storm, potentially, right? Because Storm, I think, is Air 3. Oh, Storm's Air 4. So, okay, you're going to be a bit up a creek on Storm. You can't do Storm and then therefore Storm Power. So, but if you carry a Storm Staff, you can have a big squad of guys who are going to do Storm Power, and then they're Air 3 casters for things like Thunderstrike. So, can work, but you're going to need a Staff of Storms. But air does open up things like doing summon air elemental, because you can do that with only air 2, with 2 air gems. So they can each one of those can be potentially turned into 2 air elementals in a pinch for the very low and reasonable cost of 4 air gems. Or maybe 5, I'm not sure exactly. No, I think it would have to be 4. So anyway, that's the air variety. The fire variety, they can do things like flaming arrows, summon fire elementals, a bunch of your fire stuff. They can just throw fireballs. Very, very solid mage. You're going to have them everywhere, and they're all useful. That's kind of huge. A lot of times when you get these weird like a lot of mages, they have cross paths, so they're going to be like 1, 1, 1, and then they get a random where they get 2 in another, and you have to pay for all those cross paths. These guys are just efficient. You're going to get 2 in, in one of different, a different variety of spell paths, but they're all useful. So, super solid, and then Fortune Teller is super nice on top because you can be spamming these guys out like crazy. Next, we have the Kohen. The Kohen are giants, so these are Raphites. And so they have a ton of HP, but kind of crappy stats aside from that. They're Blood 1, Holy 1, so they can self-bless, which can be nice in a pinch. And they're either 1 fire, 1 earth, or 1 astral. Now, all of these can be used as budget thugs. They're not great thugs because they have bad base stats, and this attack and defense turns out it matters. But, like the earth ones, especially if you put good armor on them, they can get their protection up high enough where you throw on 1 earth gem, and then they can go up to earth 2 with summon earth power, and then they can run through a full buff cycle and kill stuff. These are also going to be your blood hunters, primarily. They're not great blood hunters because they're very expensive. You only get blood 1, and they eat population and they cause unrest. So they're kind of... you can get them everywhere, right? So you can have a lot of them, but they're going to kind of erode your populations. But this is the cost for blood hunting with Hinnom, and it's a cost that you really have to pay. But you probably don't want to put more than 2 of these on a province, or you're just going to absolutely destroy the population. The nice thing about it too is you put these guys in provinces, they're pretty good at defending it too, because they can usually run through a buff cycle and then go attack stuff with just their built-in Censor and Gore. And depending on what they are, they can buff each other. If you have 2 blood hunting, they can stand next to each other and buff each other. Like with Earth, you have the Earth one, you give him an Earth gem. If anything important comes in attacks, he does summon Earth power, and then Iron Warriors on both him and the guy next to him, the Astral guy, presumably if it's next to him. He could do Body Ethereal on both of them. And then like Astral Shield on himself. They both run into combat. They're going to be pretty tough. They're going to kill most of the stuff that's going to come and raid your province. But they're very, very expensive blood hunters. And they're not great. So that's their main job, is kind of budget thugging and blood hunting. You're not going to want to use these guys as researchers, and I don't think you'll want to use them as thugs. They're your only recruit anywhere Raphite. So maybe it's something you do. It might be something I try in this game. I'll have to think about it. But their stat line's bad. That's the main problem with them. Okay. And they don't have really great base armor. That's the other kind of thing. You kind of are going to have to put a ton of gear on them, and then a ton of gear on a guy with bad stats. Not awesome. Not awesome. But it's something you can do. So, what next? Melquarts. Okay, these are the Knights in Shining Armor of Hinnom. These guys are fearsome. They're absolutely fearsome, and they're going to be the core of my strategy in this game. They're Holy Ones, so they're not great preachers. They all are Blood 3. Blood 3 is going to make them phenomenal blood hunters. In addition, they are adept sacrificers, and they're adept blood searchers. So they're going to blood search like a Blood 6. These guys are going to blood hunt like crazy. You throw a Sanguine Dowsing Rod on them, that's going to give them Blood Searcher 4. They'll be like their Blood 7. They don't care about the unrest in the province. They're going to get a ton of slaves almost every single turn they blood hunt. Turns you do not have Melquarts doing anything, it is okay to have them blood hunt. The problem is they're going to eat 80 population a turn, and they're going to cause 8 unrest a turn, which you're going to have to patrol out most likely, and by doing that, kill even more population, right? So if you get 8 unrest and you kill 8 unrest, it's going to be like another 80 population. So just having these guys in a population, in a province, and patrolling out the unrest they cause, you're going to be killing 160 population a turn. That's a ton. It's a ton. Yeah. So, yeah. Anyway, pretty damn significant. What else? We come in a few different varieties. We come in a fire, and an earth, and an astral variety. The fire variety at the beginning seems worse. It seems like the worst. Because he can just basically do flame shield. There's not a ton of great fire buffs. And then that's, a little bit kind of like it. But later on you get Phoenix Fire, which means you basically have to have some fatigue strategy, or you have to be able to kill these guys really fast. So at the end, these can arguably be your best, the best varieties. The Earth variety, pretty cool. You're going to be able to do all the self-buffing stuff. You can do Summon Earth Power, Iron Skin, Temper Flesh, and if they have, even with the base armor they have, right, they're going to go from kind of a reasonable 19 protection. They're going to jump up to 20 plus half of that, which is like... They're going to be up at like 28, 29 protection, I think, with Iron Skin. So, and then if you do Temper Flesh on themselves and Legions of Steel, they'll be up even higher. So, the Earth ones are so hard to kill with normal weapons. So sitting them in is just, they're crazy good. They're crazy good. Ultimately, though, you can kill these guys with anti-super combatant thugs that have armor negating weapons and things like that. But I have a special build with that in mind. But we'll talk about that in the next episode. And then finally we have the Astral ones. The Astral ones, okay, Astral 2 you can't quite teleport, but if you put a Skull Shine cap on the Astral ones, all of a sudden they can teleport now. And with the right gear and a teleporting hat on, these guys can just teleport in and delete any army which isn't set up to kill them. And that is a big deal. That's a really big deal. The problem with the Astral ones is it's also a critical weakness, because now they can get magic dueled. So you have to be careful about putting them in your armies, especially when you're fighting Astral nations, because they can just get killed. You may not have a lot of Astral mages with Hinnom, so it's highly likely that they get targeted. So, that's a risk. It's a risk of running the old Astral... Astral Thug or Super Combatant. But it's also super useful. The Astral ones are some of my favorites. You just have to be careful with them. So I think that is about it for the Melkort. They also have Fear. The Astral... Okay, let's go through the different combinations, too, with Blood. Astral Blood, it's going to open up Send Horror. Earth Blood, it's going to open up things like Father Ill-Earth and Summon Demon Knights. And then Fire Blood is going to give you all the cool Fire Blood stuff like Summon Devils and Archdevils and things like that. So... pretty cool cross path here. Importantly, with a little Bloodthorn, these guys go up to Blood 4, which is going to open up the coolest part of our strategy, but that's going to be a secret for next time. So, they're also fire resistant, so that's pretty sweet to have come built in. It means... we don't need to do fire and shock resistance. We're probably only going to need shock resistant on our bless if we want to use these guys as thugs or super combatants. They don't need to eat, which is nice. They have Wasteland Survival, which is nice. And yeah, they're great. Adept Sacrificer is going to be huge. They can blood sacrifice like a Holy 4 mage or a priest, which means if we end up wanting to do Dom push at some point in the game, we can do it better than anybody, just about. Arguably Mictlan can do more, but not... It depends. If you have enough Melkorts, you can probably out-Dom push Mictlan. So, pretty powerful stuff. I think these are probably some of the best super combatants that you can get in the game. I think they're more versatile. The thing is, a lot of players make the mistake of using super combatants like a blunt instrument, where you just march them around. It's kind of how you end up having to use Philegran Tyrants, which... I subbed into a game where I'm playing Philegra right now, and I probably won't put it up on YouTube. But God, it forces you into this paradigm of using them like a blunt instrument, and super combatants can all be countered. The nice thing about these guys is they're super versatile. They come in a bunch of different varieties. They're hard to counter. Some of them teleport. These guys are phenomenal. I love them. They're some of my favorite. And then finally we have the Baal. The Balal, or Baal, I don't know how you say it. But these guys are pretty awesome too. Both these and the other guy are 4 commander points to recruit, so you get 1 every other turn in your capital. Later in the game, you can, because you're a Blood Nation, you can 3 red seconds your capital, and then you can basically get... you get 3/4 of the way through one, so you get 50% more of them. Which is something you will probably want to be doing. And then, these guys are different. So the Melkorts were 2 or 3, and then they have a random where they get 2. These guys are different because they get 3 paths here. So they're going to be your best Astral Mages, your best Earth Mages, and your best Fire Mages. And there's some things you're going to want higher magic paths to do. Like if you're going to be a caster and not run into combat, it's better to get a Baal, is basically the bottom line. So these guys are not your super combatants, these are your super casters, and these guys are your super combatants. And you'll notice these guys have way better stats, attack and defense, 15, 18. Your Baals have kind of crappy, 14 to 11. They still potentially can super combat. They're just not going to do it as well. The nice thing about the Astral ones is they can teleport without needing any gear. And later in the game, when you're able to make more and more gear, it matters a bit less. Because the Melkorts, they come with a ton of good gear. Like, you don't need to put stuff in all these slots. So later in the game, Baals are going to be a better alternative than Melkorts, potentially. You'll probably want to mix, but anyway. They also have a 10% chance for getting an additional thing. I don't think this is anything to exactly count on, but you don't have many cross paths here, and this is going to give you some high-level cross paths potentially. So it could be really useful. Yeah. So anyway, it's nice to have, you basically just use them differently. So those are all the normal units, and we're getting close to an hour. I think we'll finish by an hour. We have a few national spells. We have some national, and I've got debug mod on. So summon Mazakim. You basically get these Maziks, which you get a ton of them. You get 8 for 3 nature gems, and you only need to be nature 1. So all of your little crappy N1 shamans can do it. So can your Akkas or Achas, however you say it. But these are what you get. These are Maziks. And they are little imps. They have a 9 damage claw, but they're demons, so things like Bloodlust, which you can totally do, is going to give all of your Maziks +4. You also have Earth Mages that can potentially do Strength of Giants earlier in the game, and that will get them up to a very nice 13 damage on their weapon. And their claws attack twice, so that strength buff is going to kind of be doubly effective on them. But nevertheless, these guys will kind of suck against units with high protection. But if you're fighting units without a lot of protection, or if you want to snipe mages and priests and archers and stuff in the back row, these guys are phenomenal, especially if you can give them that strength buff. And you get a ton of them. The other thing is, because they're flying, they have a pretty good siege strength of 1.6, and if you get 8 for 3 nature gems, then basically you're looking at... I think I did the math. If you spend 10... I'm not doing it now, but I'm just remembering from when I did it before. If you spend 10 nature gems, you're going to get about 40 siege strength, which is pretty good. Pretty good. So I think that's these guys. That sums them up. They also have Dark Vision 100, so if you're worried about darkness, these guys are an option, but that's from being a demon. They're stealthy too, so you can potentially do little stealthy Mazik squads. We also have this lady here, who's a Leela, or however you say it. But she is a seducer, so she can assassinate people. Dream seduction kind of sucks. But they're basically like budget, nature costing succubi, which is a blood spell. But Yeah, with Dream Seduction, you have to pass a morale check and a MR check to actually get seduced, so it doesn't happen very often. You even assassinate less than a normal seducer. But it's better than nothing. If we look at the cost... cost is 25 nature gems, so they're kind of expensive. I think they're a budget use. They're not something you're going to want to be kind of doing a ton of. But they can also lead magic squads, and 40 of these little dudes running around on top of some of these guys can kill a fair amount of normal PD. Hold an attack rear with enough of these guys. They're size 1, so you put a ton of them in a square, you get super high attack density. Yeah, it can work. And then you just run away. Now, in the late mid-game, once things to kind of kill stealthy raiders come out, they'll be less good. So it's a pretty small window, I think, where this is useful as a raiding strategy. But these guys have pretty high MR, so things like Mind Hunt, they're kind of resistant to. So definitely worth considering. And sometimes just having, like, not going fully into something, but just having, like, 2 of these guys running around, it can be really annoying because your opponents, they may not have the research to deal with them. And so if you had 10, it would be worth researching something to deal with these guys, but you only have 2 running around. So it's just something annoying they know they can't deal with that they're not going to deal with. So nice to have in your pocket. Though this particular unit's a bit overpriced, but the Mazigs are kind of nice for their price. Next we have Blood Summons. And we have a few. We have the Serum, or the Seers. Seers. And then we have the Shed. And so we're going to look at each of these. This one, the first one, the Seers, the Seers, it only takes blood 2 to summon, so any of your... the Cohen can do it with 1 blood booster, or any of your cap-only mage kind of giants can do it. This one's tricky, because you don't have blood heirs across path in your nation. So the only way to really do this one is to take your heir random Akkas, and to empower them in blood, and then probably give them blood items. So... this one's tricky to get, and both of these require wastelands, so you have to have a wasteland in your empire if you're going to cast them. But let's take a look. Oh, let's talk about how much they cost first. So, for the first one, for the Seers, it's blood 2, and it costs 23, and you get 5 of them. So if we look at the cost, it's about like 4.5 blood slaves per dude. And if we look at what we get these guys, and they're size 3 sacred berserking demons with 3 attacks. Okay, now they have crappy protection, they have great hit points, and they have decent stats, not awesome stats, decent stats, and pretty good MR, and pretty good combat speed. So these guys are no slouches, and they have really good MR, and dark vision, of course, because they're demons. These guys are no slouches. If you take Achille Bless, these guys are just little murder machines, right? Because they're Berserker 4, and they have a ton of HP. So once they go Berserk, they are going to be doing plus 4 damage. So these are all going to become 20 attack, and they're going to have 4 more attack skill. So they're going to be up to 17 attack here. So it's going to be 17 attack, 20 damage on all of these. And then if you do Bloodlust, which by the time you have these guys out, you wouldn't want to put them in an army where you're not doing Bloodlust, it's going to be 4 more damage, so it's going to be 3 24 damage attacks without even taking into account a Bless. Now, if you have Achille Bless with like Bloodlust and Attack, let's add more to that, right? They're going to be now doing like 3 28 damage attacks, potentially. Or more, potentially, depending if you put strength bonuses in there. If you add to the attack in your Bless, it's going to be up to, like, what were you at, 17 with Berserk, and then with Bloodlust, it would go up to 20, and then if you put additional attack, it could be up to, like, 22. 22 attack score, 28 damage attacks is just unreasonably killy. It's unreasonably killy. When are these guys going to shine? Once you can do any of the alteration stuff on top of them. So once you're up to, like, let's say you're at Alt 7, you drop mass protection on these guys and you're not fighting a fire nation. You're fighting some nation that doesn't really have fire access. They're going to be up to 10 protection, which is going to be a good bit better. They're going to be... you do Will of Fate, so they have luck. They're going to be hard to kill. There's no unit that's going to kill these guys before they get murdered very easily. And with high MR, they're going to be pretty much immune to things like Vine Shields and stuff like that, especially if you drop anti-magic on them, which is something you can do. So these guys are pretty damn solid, and you can get them in mass. The other thing, and the way this kind of works out for this nation, if you find a Wasteland, you're probably going to want to build a lab on it, and with a lab on it, you're probably going to want to put a lot of your cap-only mages, which are not actively fighting, in there, because they're going to eat the population down to 0, and your mages don't really care about that. The demons also do not really care. They don't need to eat. So you can have all the demons in a 0 population wasteland, and you can just summon these guys there and just deploy them out from there when you're ready. So these guys are ridiculously good. They're so good. They're a little expensive. 5 blood slaves for one of them is kind of expensive. And you're a nation without access to High Holy by default. So, you need to think about how you're going to buff these guys. But if you can get the... if you can get... what do you call it? Your bless on them, they are really, really good. Okay, next we're on to the shed. Now, if we look at the cost of the shed is... you get 3 for 23. Now, this is way few. So before we were getting 5 for about the same amount. And we get 2 less. So it's... And they're way harder to get, because you now need to, like, empower one of your air randoms. Like, these are hard to mass. These are easy. And the total cost, let's say this was 24, it's about 8 per. A little less. Which is significantly more than the other guys. But we get this guy. So this guy has 40 HP as compared to this guy, which had 28. So significantly more HP. Higher MR. Higher base protection. Better stats, 13 attack, 12 versus this, which is 13, 11. Better... strength is a little bit less. Precision, 11 versus 9. Oh, precision on this guy doesn't matter, but this is pretty high precision. I think the combat speed's a little lower. Yeah. But they're flying and they have map move 26. So if you have flying leaders, which you totally can, because guess what? You have Air 2 mages who can make boots of flying on any of your cap-only mages who can lead demons. These guys have ridiculous mobility. They have... Basically, these are storm demons that are not ethereal and have higher strength. And if you want to... The way to think about storm demons... so if you watched my Lemuria Let's Play, and you made it all the way to the end, you saw somebody who masked storm demons trying to go for a throne rush at the end. And it almost worked. I had to come up with very crafty, specific counters, because these guys... Storm demons would have just murdered all my stuff at that point in the game. But... basically, they throw 10 lightning bolts and then they jump into combat. And in combat, they've got this, which is going to be a very high damage magic attack once you buff their strength up. And then, in addition, it's going to do armor-negating shock damage. And then they have a lightning bolt, which is going to do AoE 1 shock, and then plus it's going to be a very high-range armor-negating attack, which scales with strength. So... are these guys not sacred? I thought these guys were sacred. Okay, they're not sacred. So if you've got a really killy bless, it may be better use to just do these and ignore them. But if you want to have these in your pocket, they can be pretty good. So they're not sacred, which is kind of a bummer, but probably fair. Because let's look at how we can get their strength up. They're a demon, so we can do Bloodlust, and that gets us to 19 strength, which is going to kick this up to 19 damage lightning bolt. We can do Wind Guide because we have air access. We can summon a Storm because we have air access. It's going to be a little tricky for us to summon a Storm because we need to be Air 3 really to do that. We're not. But there's ways to get around that. Like Crystal Matrices and stuff like that, which, we can do. But then Storm Power, when a storm is up, we're going to get 2 more strength, so it's going to kick us up to... I think we get more precision to it, I don't remember. But anyway, it's going to get us up from 19 to 21, so we're going to have 21 damage armor negating lightning attacks, which in the late game is huge because a lot of armies are wanting to put, Army of Gold or Lead on themselves. But if you have, 30 of these guys in the back throwing 20 AN lightning damage, it's going to really discourage your opponent from throwing out Army of Lead or Gold. So even if you just stop them from doing that, even if you have enough of these guys as a deterrent to stop them from doing it, it's worth it already. So that's our Sacreds that we can summon. And then those are our blood summons, and we have one final blood summon, and this one is kind of it's a little flourish you can do at the end of a game if you think you're going to win. It's ridiculously expensive. 177 is so expensive. You could get 2 Vampire Lords, but I think if you have access to these guys, you want to summon them, and we'll talk about why. You get the Lords of Civilization, which are Grigori. These guys are so strong you can't wish for them. They have, like this guy, he has 5, 9, 11, 14 magic pass. That is so strong. And then with Holy, it's 18. Holy 4. And that's just their magic pass, right? They have 88 HP, they're size 6, they have 15 base protection, but then they have invulnerability 35, which is higher than casting invulnerability, so their protection versus mundane, they're basically immune. If you don't have magic weapons, go home. This is the highest protection score you can get, basically. It caps at 40, and these guys are 37 without any gear on them. If you put gear on them, it's actually going to go up, because your natural protection versus mundane stacks with your armor. So, yeah, it's pretty nuts. Okay, well, it's 35, and then the armor is 8, and then it goes up to that. But anyway, you could get it all the way up to 80. I mean, to 40. It's diminishing returns until you get to 40, and so they do have some armor. So if you put better armor, you can get it even closer. Magic resistance 18, very solid. Morale very high. Strength 21. Attack 21. Defense 23. They're so strong. 17 precision means they make epic combat mages. They can just launch things with extreme accuracy. Map move 38. 38 and they're flying? I mean, holy crap, these guys are so good. They're so good. Plus 15 shock resistance because, and they're sacred obviously, 20 fire resistance, 15 poison resistance. They don't have cold resistance, but hey, you can put one item on them which gives them resistance because they have all the other ones. They're magic, which potentially can be a weakness. They don't need to eat, they're flying. They're stealthy, which is so important on super combatants. So you don't have to do weird things to get stealth on them like Shademail Hauberks. They're demons, which actually can be a problem because it opens you up to things like Holy Scourges. But their combat stats are so good you don't even really have to worry about the weaknesses that come with being a demon. Their damage reversal, which is huge. This is better than Blood Vengeance. Blood Vengeance, the way this works, if you take it in your Bless, when you get hit, the other person takes an MR check, and then they get hit, in addition to you getting hit. Damage reversal, if it passes, then not only do they get hit by damage reversal, but you don't get hit, right? So this actually reduces incoming damage in addition to just screwing over whoever's trying to hit you. And they have Spirit Sight, which is nice, but not super duper important. So these guys are just ridiculous. Also, they live a really long time, if that turns out to be something you're worried about. Super high leadership and magic leader, and they're an undead leader. They have the first sword as a two-handed weapon, because they should, which is a 21 damage armor-piercing weapon, which that does 47 damage. So no need to put an item here, because these guys can basically just delete enemy thugs which come in. This is part of the reason why their attack and defense is so good, because this sword has really good attack and defense. Let's go check them all out. This guy has a fist, so his attack and defense aren't quite as good. He's not quite as good as the other guy in terms of total magic paths, but I think they're all at least Holy 3. This guy's a really good fortune teller. Not quite as good of invulnerability. think I have to go and check. I think every round of combat you have a very low MR check, or some morale check maybe. And they're going to potentially seduce people who fail that morale or MR check every turn. So just having them in combat as a caster in a big battle, you'll eventually seduce some people, and it's kind of cool. I think if it's morale, you can do other things that are going to lower morale, and then people are less likely to pass that morale check. So that was Sashmael. He uses a fist, so you're going to want to put more gear on him. Then we have Ezekiel, also a fist. But you can see they all have different paths. So if you get to this, you're going to need a lot of blood, because I think you have to be blood 9, which is kind of tricky to get to, as it turns out. But you get awesome stuff. Just look at all this. Like, this guy's a healer because, of course... really, really good stuff. Now, all these guys are astral, and that means they are all susceptible to magic duel. But if they're part of an army, it's very unlikely they will be targeted by magic duel, because usually magic duel is going to go for lower astral paths. So they would have to magic duel everybody else, and then they have a chance to magic duel this guy. And if you're really worried about that, you can throw on something like a crystal heart, and then that will usually save you a lot of your magic duel headaches. But if they die, you can of course summon them back with Lords of Civilization, and they'll come back with whatever afflictions they earned. So, not super bad. Anyway, these guys are really good, but if you can summon them, then you're in a pretty good position anyway, and you probably don't need to. So that is kind of the national overview. It's been obviously a really long episode. I hope it was entertaining for you. I hope you're excited about the upcoming game. We have flexibility to do a ton of things. You can go scales. You can go some kind of crazy Wrathite warrior bless. You can go a bless that's really only good for your Melkorts. There's a ton of stuff you can do, and there's a ton of ways to play it. And I don't know if there's an optimal way to play it. I don't know if it's been figured out yet. But I can tell you I'm going to play it better than I did last time, I hope. And with that, I think we'll call an end to this episode. And so tune in next time and we'll do Pretender Design. Thanks.